Hey everyone, welcome to part 3, dealing with Genesis 49:10. Just as by way of context, what we've looked at thus far, so we looked at the story of Judah, and we saw the emphasis of the seed. You have this random kind of story about Judah that focuses really on his descendants, and then eventually you come to Genesis 49:10, where it speaks about the eternality really of Judah's right to rule, that they're going to own the scepter, they're going to own the ability to reign, and then there's going to be a culmination until Shiloh comes, and then the question is, who is Shiloh? Now, I explained in the last video, there's various different proposals for this. I think the best way to understand it is to whom it belongs is going to come, and that's going to be like the ultimate king. So again, the Genesis 49:10 component is looking forward to a specific individual. Now, in light of that, you have to question, the scepter will never depart from Judah, and yet in 586, you have Judah being exiled out of their land, you have them being taken over by the Babylonians, and so what does that mean about their right to rule? And the prophets were well aware of this passage, and they were well aware of this issue, and so you see a lot of allusions to it, especially in the book of Ezekiel. So when you turn to Ezekiel, Ezekiel, he speaks about the Spirit of God leaving the temple, the condemnation for Judah as to why they're being exiled out of the land. So Ezekiel's a very heavy book in that sense. But you have this section right over here in Ezekiel 19. Now, actually, sorry, let me just make sure that we remember what is actually said in this passage, because you're going to see a lot of similar imagery. So Genesis 49:10, remember that he's compared to a lion, that Judah is a lion's cub, that he's crouched down as a lion, as a lioness who dares rouse him. Then you have the eternality of the scepter. And then it says here, binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he has washed his garments in vine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. Essentially, this emphasis on vines and grapes, it shows the fruitfulness of the land. It shows that there is kind of peace, that you're able to plant, that you're able to take care of the land, and that you're living in prosperity. And then also same thing in verse 12, his eyes are darker than wine, likely implying that he is able to consume it, and his teeth whiter than milk. Remember, the land of Israel is a land of milk and honey. So these are great descriptions for it. And so, with this in mind, we go back to Ezekiel 19, and he's giving a judgment over the nation of Judah at this point. And so it begins in Genesis 19:1. He uses the term for princes, which is often Judean royalty. It's applied to Zedekiah in chapter 7, for example. And he says, "And you take up the lamentation for the princes of Israel and say..." Now, there's really two sections here. The first one is verses 2 through 9, and then 10 through the end. And so I'm just going to highlight the imagery that's being used. You notice, what was your mother a lioness? So remember, Judah, he's the cub of a lion. It's a lioness among lions. She crouched in the midst of young lions. She reared her cubs. So you see a lot of this imagery from Genesis 49. And then in verses 8 through 9, it says essentially the ending of it, "Then the nations set against him from the province on every side. They spread out their net over him. He was taken in their pit. With hooks they put him in a cage, and they brought him to the king of Babylon." So this right here, it's showing you that the imagery of this lion, he was eventually taken over. He was eventually captured. And then the imagery changes. Your mother, remember, your mother was like a lion. Here, your mother was like a vine in a vineyard. So again, this kind of like screams Genesis 49, because you have the lion and the vine. Here you have the lion and the vine as well. Your mother was like a vine in the vineyard, planted by the water, fruitful and full of branches by reason of abundant water. So things are going really well. Its strong stems became rulers' scepters. So again, you have a lot of this imagery being shared, but then once you get to the end of it, you see that they were captured as well. It says here, in verse 14, "And fire has gone out from the stem of its shoots, has consumed its fruits, so that there remains no strong stem, no scepter for ruling." So this right here tells you that whatever was happening, those promises that were given in Genesis 49, there's like a type of corruption that's happening now. Like the imagery that God gave now is kind of being reversed. And you see this extremely clearly when you look at Ezekiel 21, 18 through 27. Now, when we look at Ezekiel 21, this is where you see a stronger reversal. And again, when I say reversal, I don't mean that it's ignoring God's promise. Rather, obviously, I think that the promise continues onward. But you see here what Ezekiel's doing is he's kind of using this prophecy and he's revamping it. He's reorganizing it to kind of give more of a judgment, but it shows us how they understood this prophecy itself. Now, in Ezekiel 21, it's in Hebrew and English, they have different verses. In English, it's verse 26. In Hebrew, I believe it's verse 32 in Hebrew, 27 in English. So essentially in this place here, it says, thus says the Lord, remove the turban, which is often used for priestly garb, and take off the crown, which is royal garb. So again, you have this notion of priest, and you have this notion of king going on. So take off both of these things. Things shall not remain as they are. Exalt that which is low, and bring low that which is exalted. Then in verse 32 in Hebrew, it says, ruin, 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 I will make it. And then gamzot, this also essentially will not be. So right here, this shall not be. This also shall not be. And then you have the key right here. Until he comes, which is to him, mishpat, which is either judgment or vindication, depending on how you want to translate it, and I will give it to him. So in order to kind of draw the parallel between both passages here, I'm going to bring up the Genesis 49:10, and we'll see the similarity between them, where it says here, until he comes, to whom essentially judgment belongs, and then until he comes, which we could translate Shiloh, which is to whom it belongs. So you see a slight difference here, where to whom it belongs in Genesis 49 has to do with the scepter and has to do with the ruler's staff. Whereas here, to whom it belongs in Ezekiel 21 has to do with the judgment. Now, the question is, who is it actually speaking about in this case right here? And generally, because it says, this also shall not be, the notion of, the closest antecedent is a ruin, a ruin, a ruin. This will not take place until the one comes to whom judgment belongs. And so who is that we know from history? It's Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the one who's going to come and bring the judgment. So what you could see happening here is that Ezekiel, he's using this passage, and he takes it from Genesis 49, this eternality of their kingship, and he's kind of doing like a play on words with it, and he's applying it to Nebuchadnezzar as the king. So all that to say, A, you see intertextuality going on here. B, I do believe that the way that Ezekiel understood this, that which belongs, should also inform the way that we should understand this as well. Now, this doesn't mean that the promise is done away with. It doesn't mean that it's finished. Instead, I want to bring up one last passage for you. So remember the imagery from Genesis 49:11 about binding the foal to the vine, the donkey's colt to the choice vine. And then you look at Zechariah 9:9. Now, you're probably well aware of Zechariah 9:9 because of its importance in the New Testament. This is the passage that's quoted when Yeshua he's walking into to Jerusalem, and everyone's saying Hosanna. He's riding on a donkey. Now, just note the similarity between the two. It's actually fascinating when you look at the Greek in Matthew. It kind of takes the Septuagint from the Septuagint version of Genesis 49 as well as Zechariah and kind of combines them. But just notice the similarity between both passages here, binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. So essentially this is, a lot of success. And here it says, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation, and salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on the colt, the foal of a donkey. And so this imagery of coming in on a donkey, often people say Zechariah 9:9 is to some degree dependent on Genesis 49:11. Now, the notion of a donkey, it was actually used for kings. The sons of kings often rode on donkeys, like we see in the book of Samuel. So, it's not like a derogatory element here going on or anything like that. It was something that rulers would ride on. And so you see finally this connection right here. So, in light of all of that, all right, there's been a lot of information that's been kind of thrown at you here. So, in light of all of that, this kind of gives a synopsis of what we looked at. You have the story of Judah and Tamar, which focuses on the seed, right? The seed of Judah. This is a main emphasis for the author. Then you have the prophecy of Judah, which not only gives kingship to the nation of Judah, or rather to the tribe of Judah, but it also looks forward to one. Until the one to whom it belongs ultimately. So that means, in my opinion, at this point, Judah still has the right to rule, but we're still looking forward to the ultimate king who's going to reign and establish peace on earth, and then to him shall be the obedience of all the people, meaning Jews and Gentiles together. The entire world will be worshiping him. And then finally, we have the intertextuality component. And this is where we saw it with Ezekiel 19, Ezekiel 21, and then Zechariah 9:9. We're able to see that Ezekiel kind of speaks about the reversal of the prophecy. Not that it's done away with, but just kind of a reworking of it just to contextualize it for their historical setting. But then Zechariah renews that hope. And it's saying that there's still going to be a king. There's still going to be someone who's going to come, who's going to ride on the donkey. And so that right there concludes the Genesis 49 passage. It's very deep. This passage is extremely important in Second Temple literature, and it definitely points to the ruling position of King Messiah, essentially. And so when you even look at the New Testament, you have the established line of the Messiah, where you see the genealogy and how important it is to come from Judah. And then also in Revelation 5:5, it says, "Don't weep, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has triumphed." And so that shows us the importance of this imagery culminating in the Messiah.